Um, First of all, I'd like to thank the dignitaries around here, the President of Senegal, and the other foreign dignitaries. If you wouldn't mind, I'd like to speak in English because j'ai parlé le français un peu. And first of all, let me thank the African Media Initiative for inviting me to speak to you, and also for holding this conference, and also the sponsors who supported this important event, and you for finding some time to come and listen to me. Now, I was very thrilled to accept this invitation because few of us, the educated in Africa, understand the importance of the media in our societies. You see, societies that allow free flow of information are those that advance, because the flow of information, our problems cannot be solved if we cannot expose them, debate solutions to them, and also find optimal solutions to our problems. Now, Ethiopian proverb says that he who conceals his disease cannot expect to be cured. For much of the post-colonial period, our diseases have been concealed by the state-controlled media. And that's one of the reasons why corruption, for example, human rights abuses, poverty, tyranny, have persisted in post-colonial Africa. Now, the dictators know the importance of the media because information is power. As Joseph Stalin once said, control the flow of information and you control the people's minds. Out of the 54 African countries, only 10 have a free media. Now, take a country like Ethiopia. A country with a population of 83 million has only one national radio station. And guess who controls it? Are you surprised that Ethiopia is a country which has been hit periodically by famine and starvation? One Nobel laureate, Amartya Sen, says that famine or starvation are not very common in countries that are democratic and also have a free press. If Ghana is doing well, it is because we fought for freedom and wrestled control of the media out of the hands of the government. Now we have more than 70 FM radio stations in Ghana. Now, the media, radio is very powerful. Radio is the life and death in Africa. The dictators can control it, they can monopolize it. See, this is one of the reasons why every dictator, no matter where he is, the first thing they go after is the media. They seize control of the media, use the media to distort information, to mislead the people, and they can also use the media for diabolical ends. Remember Rwanda. Radio Mills Calling was used by the Hutu-dominated government to whip up ethnic hatred against the Tutsis. Over 1 million Tutsis were slaughtered because the radio was used as a propaganda tool against them. Now, much as we would like to wrestle control of the media out of their hands, we must also recognize that there's a huge burden of responsibility on media practitioners, that we need to transmit information accurately, responsibly, ethnically, and morally. So I was very thrilled to read the AMI Leadership Principles and Guidelines, which was crafted in Tunisia. Now, the purpose of that is to try and create or nurture a culture of governance, good governance, transparency, accountability, and trust. And towards this end, the guidelines seek to identify certain duties, such as promoting freedom of expression, promoting journalists, protecting them, and also to instill good behavior, accountability, among the journalists. And I commend you highly for this. However, I shall also be careful not to create certain misconceptions or misinformation or false impressions. Two of them. The first one is that there are hundreds of journalists who are languishing in jail. Hundreds more have been exiled in Africa. Hundreds more have been killed in Africa. We do not want to create the impression that they deserve their fate because they acted unprofessionally. Far from it. There are many of us here in this room who go about their activities in fear. And also, they engage in a deliberating orgy of self-censorship. Why? Because in Africa, you say something or you write something which a government doesn't like, and poof, you're either dead or you're in jail. Now let's get something straight. Freedom of expression was not invented by the white man, nor by the West. Remember Africa's history. For centuries, we have taught our children through the oral tradition, by telling them stories, by family members, and also by griots. Griots were not arrested or detained because they told a story the chief or the king didn't like. We've also had musicians in African history, artists who have expressed their views freely. Now all of a sudden this has changed in post-colonial Africa. Now we must wrestle control of the media out of their hands and permit the free flow of information in Africa. At a minimum, we should go to the aid of those journalists who have been jailed. Or at a minimum, we should ask the African Union to expel those countries that do not respect Article 9 of the African Union's own charter that guarantees freedom of expression. The second impression that I don't want to create is that we don't want to pretend that if the media were to follow good principles of accountability and good governance, then all of a sudden Africa's problems will be exposed and solved. That is not the case, because the media alone did not fail Africa. There are other groups that also failed Africa. Who are these groups? And have they put in place principles to ensure that they too are following good governance principles? The first group is the leadership. And I'm afraid to say this, that the post-colonial leadership, the quality of the post-colonial leadership has been terrible. And we have to admit this ourselves. Look, since 1960, we have had exactly 222 African heads of state. Now, I'd like you to name me 20 good leaders. Just 20. Everybody will mention Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Julius Nyerere, Senghor, and so forth. But they will be hard-pressed to get to 15. Even if they get to 15, 20 out of 220 means that the vast majority of the leaders were utter failures. Now, many of them, they come to power and they stay and stay and stay 10, 20, 30, 40 years. Not even bulldozers can get rid of some of them. There are only three things they know how to do well. And that is to loot the treasury, perpetuate themselves in office, and squash all opposition. This is not the kind of leadership that we need to move Africa forward. Now, remember that these leaders also, they are also stakeholders. They have to reform themselves. Have they been able to reform themselves? Back in 1986, President Museveni of Uganda said, no African leader should be in power for more than 10 years. We said, yay! He's still there, 26 years later. And then you remember President Clinton, 1998, he went to Africa and he hailed the leaders of Ethiopia, Eritrea, Uganda, Congo, Rwanda as the new leaders of Africa. What happened to them? Within 6 months after returning to the US, Ethiopia and Eritrea, they were at war. And the rest of the so-called new leaders were fighting among themselves in Congo's First World War. Now, you may also remember that in 2003, the AU came up with the peer review mechanism, where African leaders were to judge themselves and improve good governance. 2003, what happened? You and I know that nothing became of it. Now get this, the leadership is simply not interested in reform. You ask them to develop their economies and they will develop their pocket. You ask them to seek foreign investment and they will seek a foreign country to invest, they loot. Ask them to establish good governance and they will establish a ministry of good governance in Tanzania. Ask them to cut government spending and they will set up a ministry of less government spending. Ask them to establish multi-party democracy and then they will write the rules themselves. And then toss the opposition leaders into jail and then hold coconut elections to return themselves to power. This is the problem that we face in Africa. The reform process, the democratization process has stalled. Now, back in 1990, there were 10 democracies in Africa. 22 years later, today, we have only 14 countries that are democratic. Now, recently, in April, we had a military coup in Mali, then another coup in Guinea-Bissau. It's as if we take one step forward and then 3 steps back. We are in a conundrum. Without reform, more African countries would implode. But you see, the leadership is not interested in reform. See, we can't get rid of our leaders without destroying our countries. Look at Libya, look at Somalia, look at Burundi, look at Congo, look at Sudan. It's a conundrum. Now, the next group is my own profession, the intellectuals, the scholars. We have let Africa down badly. Remember Laurent Gbagbo of Ivory Coast? He used to be a professor of history. Remember Abdoulaye Wade? He also used to be a professor of history. Our profession has let Africa down badly. At a minimum, we should also have guidelines that no African intellectual will ever support a military dictatorship or even serve under one. At least we can have that as a minimum. The next group has been the opposition. A force, for every force there's a counterforce. A force dominates if the counterforce is weak or non-existent. In many African countries, the opposition is weak and non-existent. Look at Zimbabwe, 23 opposition groups. Ethiopia, more than 100 opposition groups. Cameroon, more than 200 opposition groups. Minimum. The opposition leaders also have to have some kind of guidelines. And they have to at least unite to fight a common enemy. And this is how we progress as a nation. The last group has been an international community, quite often burdened by colonial guilt, political correctness, racial sensitivity. The international community has remained silent as Africans were being slaughtered in Biafra, in Rwanda, for example, in Sudan and also Somalia. And they've also remained silent whilst Africa's wealth is being looted. Now, it is some of them are coming around, okay? But we also need them to change their ways of thinking. Now, which brings me to this, and that is, we all have to do our part to promote good governance. But good governance is a collective responsibility. Africans say that it takes a village to educate a child. Similarly, it takes a village to push for good governance. By good governance, what do we mean by good governance? To illustrate this, consider a car. A car is an amalgamation of systems. There is a brake system, there is an electrical system, there is a transmission system. Each system is independent. And each system must be in good working condition. And you can't mismatch systems. You cannot use oil to put oil in the radiator. Similarly, we have a society, and there are institutions in society. Institutions are to society what systems are to a car. Each institution also has a specific role to play and has to play this role well. Now, when the systems in the car are doing what they are supposed to do, then we have the car is in good working condition. Similarly, when the institutions in the society are doing what they are supposed to do, then we have good governance. Now, the media is only one of the 7 institutions that we have in society. The others are, we have the civil service, we have parliament, we have the electoral commission, we have the judiciary, we have the central bank, for example. And then we also have the security forces. Each one of them has to go about its act professionally and ethically. Each one of those also have to have guiding principles in order to assure good governance, transparency, and accountability. It is not the media alone which has to do it. Like I said, it's a collective responsibility that all of us, the stakeholders, also have to ensure that they have good governance in their own institutions. That's when I'd like to commend you very well for setting the stage for the others to follow. We, the intellectuals, also need to have the good governance. And finally, we should remember this. If one griot is down, all of us must go to his aid. Thank you very much.